She almost walked right past her, just 3 more steps, just keep moving toward home the way she did after every long shift. Just ignore that faint, broken sound coming from the dark. If she had done that, this story never would have happened. And neither would the life that came after it. Chicago that night was bitter enough to cut skin, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, the kind that makes you drop your head and walk faster. The sky was solid black, not a single star. December wind screamed between the old worn buildings on the south side. Ellie pulled her thin coat tight and kept moving through the alley she'd walked hundreds of times before. She was tired, she was hungry, she was drained all the way down to nothing. In her pocket, exactly $1.52. Money meant for pain medication, for her grandmother lying in a hospital bed, 18 hours on her feet in the emergency room. 18 hours without eating, without sitting, without resting. A shift from hell finally over, and she still had to walk home because she couldn't afford a cab. The last bus had left hours ago. Ellie Bennett, 28 years old, a nurse, graduated with honors, worked like a dog. And still broke. Life kept doing this to her, year after year. She tried with everything she had. And it was never enough. She lowered her head and kept walking, and then she heard it, a moan, thin and weak, like an injured cat, but it wasn't a cat. Ellie stopped, her heart clenched tight. She looked toward the darkness behind a trash bin. At first she thought it was a garbage bag, then she saw a hand, a human hand. Ellie ran. The woman was lying there on her side, her back against the cold brick wall. Her clothes were expensive but torn apart. Silver hair had come loose and was spilling over a pale face. Blood from a wound on her head ran down her cheek, down her throat, and onto the filthy alley floor. Her lips were blue. Her breathing came in broken little pulls, getting weaker by the second. Ellie dropped to her knees. The nurse in her took over completely, 2 fingers on the woman's neck. The pulse was there, thread thin. But it was there. She was still alive. Ellie grabbed her phone and called 911. The voice on the other end was flat. Almost bored, south side. Ambulance wait time is at least 40 minutes. 40 minutes. The woman would be dead before anyone arrived. Fear crashed in. Ellie looked around the dark mouth of the alley. The attacker could still be here. She was alone, unarmed. She could be in danger. She could get dragged into something. She could just leave. She'd called the police, hadn't she? They would come. It wasn't her problem, but something stronger than fear rose up in her chest. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. Ellie, never step over someone who needs help, because one day it might be you who needs someone to stop. She couldn't leave her here. Ellie pulled off her coat and wrapped it around the woman's head to slow the bleeding. She slid her arm under the woman's back and tried to lift her. The body was heavier than she expected, or maybe Ellie was just too exhausted, but she still stood up. She still moved forward, step by step, staggering through the cutting cold. Her breath came fast, her muscles shook. Her mind screamed at her to stop, but her heart wouldn't listen. St. Clair's Hospital was a 15-minute walk from there, with a dying woman on her back. 15 minutes felt like 15 years. Ellie didn't know that the person fading against her shoulder was Vivian Cross, the mother of Dante Cross, the mob boss who terrified all of Chicago. She didn't know that on the other side of the city, the most powerful man in Chicago was tearing the world apart looking for his mother. She didn't know that when their 2 worlds collided, nothing would ever be the same. Ellie knew only one thing. Someone needed saving, and that small act was about to change everything. Ellie sat on an icy plastic chair outside the emergency room, her hands still smeared with the blood of a stranger. The clock on the wall read 3:30 in the morning. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The steady beep of machines drifted out from behind closed doors. She'd been sitting there for more than an hour, since the doctors had rushed Vivian's gurney into emergency surgery. Severe concussion, deep scalp wound, significant blood loss, surgery immediately to close the wound and check for pressure on the brain. Ellie had nodded like a machine and signed the consent form because there was no one else here. No one knew who the woman was. No one came looking for her, only Ellie, a broke nurse with $52 in her pocket, sitting here praying for a stranger. She closed her eyes and memory hit her like a flood. 16 years earlier, Ellie was 12. That day was a Saturday, 1 week before the school performance. Little Ellie had begged her mom to take her to buy new shoes. Her mom, Nora, had just gotten off a night shift at the factory. Dark circles under her eyes, barely awake, but she still smiled and nodded. "All right, my little princess, I'll take you." They got in the car. Ellie sat in the back seat, legs swinging, singing under her breath. Nora drove, turning now and then to smile at her daughter. Then everything happened too fast. Blinding headlights, the shriek of a truck horn, metal slamming into metal, glass shattering, then silence. When Ellie woke up in the hospital, she asked where her mom was. Nobody answered. They only looked at her with pity. Then Gran arrived, pulled her into her arms, and sobbed, "Your mom's gone, Ellie, your mom's gone." In the days that followed, Ellie heard the adults whispering. If the girl hadn't insisted on buying shoes that day, if Nora hadn't indulged her, poor thing, orphaned at only 12, those words sank into her heart like knives. Ellie began to believe she had killed her mother. Every night she clutched her pillow and cried, calling for her mom in her dreams. Then, waking with the pillow soaked through, Gran held her and said again and again, "It wasn't your fault." But Ellie didn't believe her. She never did. On the first anniversary of her mom's death, Ellie stood at the grave, 13 years old. Thin and ghost pale, she knelt down and placed her hand on the cold headstone. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I asked to go that day. I'm sorry you died instead of me." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I promise you I'll save as many people as I can. I'll never leave anyone behind. Never." That was why she became a nurse. That was why she worked 18 hours a day without complaining. That was why she couldn't leave Vivian in the dark alley tonight. The operating room door opened. Ellie shot to her feet. The doctor stepped out, pulled down his mask. His face was exhausted, but his eyes were relieved. "Are you the one who brought her in?" Ellie nodded. "She's out of immediate danger. We stopped the bleeding and relieved the pressure on her brain. But there's a problem." Ellie held her breath. "She has temporary memory loss. It could be the trauma or the shock. She doesn't remember who she is, doesn't remember her family, doesn't remember what happened. We don't know her name." The doctor looked at Ellie. "Do you know who she is?" Ellie shook her head. "I found her in an alley. She had no ID, no phone. I don't know who she is." The hospital registered Vivian under the name Jane Doe, an unidentified woman, no insurance, no family. No one coming to claim her. Ellie stood outside the recovery room and looked through the glass. The woman lay there with bandages wrapped around her head. Pale face, breathing in an even rhythm with the help of machines. A stranger, but Ellie had made a promise at her mother's grave 16 years ago. She wouldn't leave anyone behind. "I don't know who you are," Ellie whispered through the glass, "but someone is looking for you. I promise I'll stay here until you remember everything." At the same time, on the other side of the city, in a grand mansion on the North Shore, Dante Cross shattered the third table of the night. His mother had been missing for 6 hours, and someone was going to pay. The Cross mansion sat in silence on the North Shore where Chicago's wealthiest people lived. Inside a dark study, lit only by the fire in the hearth, Dante Cross sat motionless in a leather chair, one hand around a glass of whiskey that had gone cold long ago, 36 years old, steel-gray eyes. A faint scar running from his temple down to his cheekbone, a reminder of a blood-soaked past. On the desk, among all the files and documents, there was only one photograph. His mother, Vivian Cross, on her 63rd birthday. She was smiling, that gentle smile Dante loved more than anything in the world. The door flew open. Marco Rixai, Dante's right hand for 20 years, stepped in with a face gone white. Marco had never looked that pale. "Boss," Marco said, his voice shaking, "something's happened, Mrs. Vivian. Her car was attacked on the way back from the cemetery. The driver is dead. She's missing." The whiskey glass slipped from Dante's hand. It shattered on the floor. He didn't feel the sting when a shard of glass cut his skin. He only felt the blood in his body turning to ice. What? One word, cold as winter. "We found the car 3 miles from the cemetery," Marco said. "It was rammed. The driver was shot. Mrs. Vivian wasn't there. No trace." Dante stood, walked out of the mansion, got into his car, and tore toward the scene. His mother's black car lay on the roadside, the front end crushed, the windows blown out. Dante climbed into the back seat where his mother always sat. The familiar scent of her perfume still lingered. On the floor, he saw the embroidered handkerchief he'd given her last year. It was soaked with blood. Dante picked it up. His hand trembling, he pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number. It rang and rang. No answer. "Mom," Dante whispered into the emptiness. "Where are you?" And memory surged up, cruel and razor-sharp. 22 years earlier, Dante was 14. That night he'd been doing homework in his room when he heard gunshots. He ran down the stairs and saw his father, Edward Cross, the most powerful boss in Chicago at the time, sprawled on the floor. Blood pouring from his chest, spreading across the white marble. His mother was on her knees beside him, screaming, trying to press her bare hands over the wound. The man holding the gun stood there with a face like ice. Leon Hart, his father's right hand, the man his father trusted most. "Why?" Edward asked, blood bubbling at his lips. Leon smiled. "For money, Edward. It's that simple." Then he fired again. Edward Cross died in front of his son. Vivian pulled Dante against her and covered the boy's eyes, but he had already seen everything. His father's blood, the traitor's smile, his mother's desperate sobs. From that night on, Dante Cross was no longer a 14-year-old boy who laughed easily. He became the man all of Chicago feared. He built an empire from his father's ashes, cold and ruthless, but holding one vow at the center of his heart: protect his mother at any cost. And now his mother was missing. Dante stepped out of the car, his eyes bloodshot but dry. He had forgotten how to cry 22 years ago. Marco waited outside with 20 other men, all of them silent, all of them waiting for orders. "Mobilize everyone," Dante said, his voice low as thunder. 200 men, search every street in Chicago, pull every security camera, every hospital, every morgue, find her. Marco nodded. "And Hart," Dante turned, and his eyes were no longer cold. They burned like hell. "Investigate whether he's behind this." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. In the hours that followed, Chicago sank into a silent storm. Dante's people appeared everywhere, from the darkest alleys to the richest neighborhoods. Security footage was pulled. Witnesses were questioned. The underground network was activated, but there was no sign of Vivian. She had vanished from the earth. Then Marco brought information that made Dante's jaw go tight. "Boss, we found out Mrs. Vivian dismissed her security herself. She wanted to visit Mr. Edward's grave alone. She's done it many times before, but this time Dante drove his fist into the wall, cracking the plaster. His mother hated being guarded. She always said, "I'm a prisoner in my own home." He knew that, but he never thought she'd risk something like this. And now she was out there somewhere, maybe hurt, maybe bleeding, maybe calling his name while he couldn't hear her. Dante stood at the office window and looked out over Chicago in the rising dawn. Somewhere out there, his mother was waiting. Alive or dead, he didn't know. "Anyone who touched my mother," Dante said into the darkness, his voice like a curse dragged up from the deepest part of hell, "will beg to die." He didn't know that miles away, at the Poor St. Clare's Hospital on the south side, his mother was lying in a hospital bed. And the person who had saved her, who had carried her through the cutting cold, was only a thin young nurse with $52 in her pocket. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful night. Vivian was out of immediate danger, but her memory was still a blank sheet of paper. She remembered her first name was Vivian, nothing more, no last name, no home, no sense that anyone was searching for her. St. Clare's Hospital couldn't keep her forever. No insurance, no ID, no family member coming to claim her. The bill had climbed to more than $8,000. The hospital was starting to press. Ellie stood at the front desk, pulled out the last of her savings, the money she'd been putting aside to buy Gran's medication this month. She placed it on the counter. Her voice was strangely calm. "I'll take her to my place. I know it isn't ideal, but it's better than her being sent to a public shelter in this condition." Until she remembers everything, Ellie's apartment was on the 5th floor of an old building with no elevator. South Side Chicago, the part of town people called the Forgotten Zone. She helped Vivian up each flight of stairs, Vivian still weak after surgery. When Ellie opened the door, shame rose in her throat. The room was only 25 square meters. Walls stained with damp and mold, paint peeling off in sheets. The heater had been broken for 2 years. In winter, she survived with a few thin blankets. Tape lined the window to keep the wind out. One narrow bed. One small table, a mini fridge that hummed day and night. That was everything Ellie had. Vivian looked around the room. Ellie saw something flicker in her eyes, not disgust, not pity, pain. Even without knowing who she was, Vivian could feel the difference. She knew she didn't belong here, but she said nothing. She only took Ellie's hand and smiled. "You opened your door to a stranger. This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen." Ellie almost cried at those words. In the days that followed, they learned how to live together. Ellie gave Vivian the bed and slept on the battered old chair in the corner. She worked night shifts at the hospital, came home to care for Vivian, then went back again. They shared plain meals. Canned soup, bread, sometimes nothing but rice porridge with a pinch of salt. Vivian never complained. She even insisted on helping with housework, even when Ellie tried to stop her. Once, Vivian tried to use the gas stove to boil water, but didn't know how to light it. Ellie had to show her, and they laughed together, a rare sound in the cold little room. "I don't remember who I am," Vivian said, "but I'm sure there's no gas stove in my home." Ellie laughed. "I'm guessing your house has a private chef." Vivian tilted her head, thinking, then shook it. "I don't remember, but it could be." They talked more. Vivian spoke about scattered fragments of memory. A large house, a man she loved, a deep sorrow she couldn't explain. Ellie talked about Gran, about nursing, about the nights she cried alone because she was just so tired. They began to hold on to each other like mother and daughter, even though they'd known each other less than a week. Then the 5th night came. Ellie was dozing in the chair when she jolted awake, a sound at the door. A soft scraping, like someone clawing at the wood. Her heart seized. Vivian's attacker. They'd found her. They were here. Ellie rose silently, went to the kitchen, took the biggest knife she owned, stood behind the door with both hands wrapped around the handle. Her body shaking, barely daring to breathe, Vivian slept on the bed, unaware. The sound continued, then stopped, then started again. Ellie stood there all night, eyes fixed on the door, not closing them for even a second. If someone came in, she would fight. She would protect this woman at any cost. Dawn light slipped through the edge of the window. Ellie opened the door, the knife still in her hand, and she saw it. A skinny stray cat, dirty gray fur, curled up on the floor in front of her apartment. It looked up at Ellie with hungry eyes and let out a weak little meow. Ellie lowered the knife, sank down, and laughed, laughing with tears running down her face. She'd stayed awake all night because of a cat. But the fear was still there. Someone had attacked Vivian. Someone could come back, and Ellie knew she couldn't protect her forever. Inside the room, Vivian had woken up. She stared out the window. Shards of memory began to flash behind her eyes. A man's face, gray eyes, a scar, a name Dante. She didn't remember clearly yet, but she knew that somewhere out there someone was looking for her. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night in the dark alley. Vivian sat on the worn chair by the window, helping Ellie fold the laundry. It had become their routine every afternoon, right before Ellie left for her night shift. In the corner of the room, the small television was running the evening news, the sound drifting through like background noise neither of them really heard, until the anchor's voice landed on something that made Vivian freeze in place. The mysterious disappearance of an upper-class Chicago woman remains unsolved after 3 weeks. Police refused to release the victim's identity at the family's request, but sources say she's a member of a powerful North Shore family. Her private driver died at the scene. If anyone has information, please call the hotline. No photo, no name, but the description: a black car, the location near Rose Hill Cemetery, the timing 3 weeks ago. Everything matched perfectly. Vivian let the shirt slip from her fingers, and memory came roaring back like a tidal wave. She remembered everything: the cemetery, Edward's grave, her husband, the man she loved who had died 22 years earlier. She'd slipped away from her security to visit him alone, the way she always did when she needed silence. On the way back, the car was hit, the crunch of metal, the crack of gunfire, the driver collapsing over the steering wheel. She'd forced the door, crawled out and ran into the nearest alley, but they chased her. She saw the attacker's face. Cold and ruthless, Victor Crane, Leon Hart's trusted enforcer, the man whose boss had killed her husband 22 years ago. He caught her, knocked her to the ground, stripped her purse and phone. "Hello, Mrs. Cross," he said with a vicious smile. "Send my regards to your son." Then he kicked her in the head, and darkness swallowed everything. Vivian Cross, widow of Edward Cross, mother of Dante Cross, the most powerful mob boss in Chicago. She trembled, tears streaming down her face. Ellie rushed to her and wrapped her in her arms. "Mrs. Vivian, what is it? Did you remember something?" Vivian looked up at the young woman with worried eyes. The girl who had saved her life, cared for her for 10 days, shared every plain meal with her. She had to tell the truth. "Ellie," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion, "I remember now. I know who I am. I'm Vivian Cross, Dante Cross's mother. People call my son the mob boss of Chicago." Ellie took a step back like she'd been shocked by electricity. Cross, in Chicago, everyone knew that name. The papers called them the most powerful family in the city. People whispered about bloody hits, about an underground empire that controlled Chicago itself. And Ellie had sheltered the mob boss's mother for the past 20 days. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, typed Vivian Cross Chicago into the search bar. The result appeared immediately, a photograph from last year's charity event. Vivian Cross, 63 years old, widow of the late businessman Edward Cross, mother of Dante Cross, chairman of Cross Group. The woman in the photo was smiling softly, wearing an elegant evening gown, silver hair pinned up with grace. It was the same woman sitting here in Ellie's 25 square meter room, wearing the old sweater Ellie had lent her. Ellie went pale. She'd saved the mother of a mob boss, sheltered her in her home. She knew too much. In the world of people like the Crosses, knowing too much often meant death. Vivian saw the fear in Ellie's eyes. She understood. She took Ellie's hand, her voice grave. Ellie, listen to me. You saved my life, but if Hart finds out you helped me, you'll be in danger. You should stay away, forget me, pretend you never met me. Ellie looked at the woman in front of her. Vivian wasn't only the mob boss's mother. She was the woman who'd laughed with her while learning how to use a gas stove. She was the woman who'd held her hand when Ellie talked about her mom. She was the woman who'd eaten canned soup without complaining once. She was a stranger who had become family in 10 short days. You're not a bad person, Ellie said, her voice shaking but firm. Whatever your son does, that's not you. I'm not leaving you. Vivian cried. She pulled Ellie into her arms the way she would have held the daughter she'd never had. I'll call Dante, she said. My son will come for me, and I promise I won't let anyone hurt you. She borrowed Ellie's phone, her hand shaking as she dialed the only number she still knew by heart. It rang once, twice, then someone picked up. Silence on the other end. Vivian spoke, her voice breaking. Dante, it's Mom. The silence stretched like a century. Then a voice came through, trembling, shattered, no longer cold the way it usually was. Mom. 45 minutes after the call, the poor street on the south side suddenly went dark. 15 glossy black SUV rolled in nose to tail and packed the whole block, vehicles worth many times more than Ellie's apartment. 30 men in black suits stepped out and formed a line like a wall of steel, eyes sweeping every window, every corner, every stretch of pavement. Ellie's neighbors watched through cracked doors, whispering to one another in fear. The police never came to this neighborhood that fast. But this wasn't the police. This was something far more frightening than the police. The first vehicle's door opened. Dante Cross stepped out. He wore his usual black suit, but today it was rumpled like he'd been in it for 3 straight weeks without changing. His beard was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. His sharp face with the scar at his temple looked more hollow than it ever had. Yet, even at his worst, Dante still carried the kind of power that made people lower their heads. He didn't speak. He walked straight into the old building and took the stairs 4 at a time. Marco and 2 others hurried after him. But Dante was faster than all of them. He couldn't wait 1 more second. Ellie stood inside the apartment, heart hammering as heavy footsteps hit the hallway. Then the door burst open. Dante stood there, chest rising and falling from climbing too fast. His gaze swept the miserable little room before it locked onto the woman by the window, Vivian, his mother. Her head still wrapped in bandages, her body thinner after 10 days, but standing there, alive, breathing. Mom, 1 word, just one, but it held every sleepless night, every nightmare, every fear Dante had kept caged for 10 days. He stepped forward, then he ran, then he crashed into her and held her the way a lost child holds home after finally finding the road back. Vivian wrapped her arms around her son and stroked his hair the way she had when he was small. I'm here, she whispered. I'm safe now. I'm sorry I made you worry. And the impossible happened. Dante Cross, the mob boss all of Chicago feared, the man who had forgotten how to cry 22 years ago, was crying. His tears soaked into his mother's shoulder, the first tears since the day his father fell into a pool of blood. Marco and the others stood outside the doorway, no one daring to step in. They had never seen Dante like this. They hadn't even known he could cry. I thought I'd lost you, Dante said, his voice breaking. 20 days, Mom. I turned Chicago upside down and I couldn't find you. I thought you had. He couldn't finish. He didn't dare say it. Vivian took his face in her hands and wiped his tears the way she used to. I'm here, I'm alive, because of her. She turned her head toward Ellie, and only then did Dante see her for the first time. She stood tucked into the corner, as if she were trying to make herself as small as possible. Jeans torn at the knee, an old sweater worn thin at the shoulders, brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, a narrow face with dark circles beneath sleepless eyes. She looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in years, but her back was straight, and when their eyes met, she didn't look down. She stared right at Dante, no fear, no flinching. Dante was used to people fearing him. Everyone feared him. But this girl, this thin young woman in this shabby apartment, didn't shake. He walked toward her, the instinctive suspicion that lived in his blood rising to the surface. Who are you? His voice turned cold again. Sharp as a blade, Vivian started to speak, but Dante went on. Everyone wants something. Money, power, protection. What do you want? Say it. How much? Ellie looked at the man in front of her. This was the mob boss the newspapers wrote about. This was the man all of Chicago feared. This was Dante Cross. But she had also just watched him cry in his mother's arms like a child. She took a deep breath. I'm Ellie Bennett, a nurse. I found Mrs. Vivian in an alley 10 days ago. I brought her to the hospital. I took care of her when she had amnesia, and I don't want anything. Dante gave a short, hard laugh. No one is good for free. Ellie felt her heart hammering against her ribs, the sheer weight of his presence almost suffocating her. Every instinct screamed at her to look away, but her pride rose up like a shield. She wouldn't let him reduce her entire life's worth to a business deal. She didn't move. Then you haven't met enough decent people. That sentence stopped Dante cold. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a threat to be measured, but as a person. Vivian stepped forward and took Ellie's hand. She's telling the truth, Dante. She used her last savings to pay for my hospital care. She went hungry so I could eat. She slept on the chair so I could have the bed. 20 days, my son. 20 days she cared for a stranger and asked for nothing. Dante didn't speak. He only nodded at Ellie, a small gesture, reluctant but no longer icy. Then he helped his mother to the door. Vivian turned back and hugged Ellie one last time. We'll see each other again, I promise. The black convoy drove away, leaving Ellie standing alone in the empty room. She looked at the chair where Vivian had been sitting, looked at the bed where she had been lying, and the room felt colder than it ever had. In the SUV rolling back toward the North Shore, Dante stared out the window, watching the old building fade behind them. Who is she, that Mom trusts her like that? He asked Marco. Marco shook his head. I don't know, boss, but she's different. Dante didn't answer. He was asking himself the same thing. 3 days after Vivian left, Ellie's life began to change in strange ways she couldn't explain. That morning, she went to St. Clair's to visit Gran the way she always did. Her grandmother had been in the hospital for more than 2 months with late-stage cancer, the medical bills piling up like a mountain. Ellie had been picking up extra shifts just to pay it off $1 at a time. But when she stopped at the front desk to ask about this month's payment, the nurse on duty looked at her with wide eyes. "Miss Bennet, your grandmother's bill has been paid. All of it, $187,000. Ellie thought she'd misheard. "Who paid it?" The nurse shook her head. "Anonymous. They only asked that we not share the name." Ellie stood there. "The world's spinning. $187,000. Money she might not earn in a lifetime. Who could pay that for a stranger?" But she already knew the answer. There was only one person. When Ellie got back to her apartment, she realized everything was different. The heater was running, the room warm for the first time in 2 years. The windows had been replaced, no gaps left for wind to slip through. The refrigerator, when she opened it for a glass of water, was suddenly full of food. The kind of food she had never dared buy because it cost too much. Fresh meat, vegetables, milk, eggs, fruit, and on the table, a black envelope. Ellie picked it up, her hands trembling. Inside was $20,000 in cash, stacked neatly in bundles, along with a black business card that held only one thing. An address, Cross Tower, 50th floor. Ellie sat down and stared at the money in front of her. $20,000. More than 2 years of her wages. With that money, she could clear her debts. She could rest. She could buy Gran the best of everything. Part of her wanted to take it. Accept the gift, keep living. But another part of her, the part her mother had taught her when she was little, the part Gran had nurtured for 16 years, was shouting in her head. A debt of money can be repaid. A debt of kindness can last a lifetime. She hadn't saved Vivian for money. She'd saved her because it was the right thing to do. If she took this, her act would turn into a transaction. And Ellie Ben, it didn't sell her kindness. That afternoon, Ellie stood in front of Cross Tower and looked up at 50 stories of glass and steel. She walked into the lobby, the envelope gripped tight in her hand. The security guard looked her up and down. Contempt plain on his face when he saw her wore out clothes. "What do you need?" Ellie lifted her chin. "I need to see Mr. Dante Cross." The guard gave a sharp, amused snort. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then you can't go up. Tell him Ellie Ben is here to return his money." The guard started to refuse, but Mako appeared from somewhere nearby and gave a small nod. Let her up. The elevator carried Ellie to the 50th floor. The doors opened and she stepped into a different world. Dante's office was larger than her entire apartment. Glass walls overlooking all of Chicago, expensive oak and black leather everywhere. Dante sat behind his desk. Late afternoon, sunlight catching the scar on his face. He watched her walk in, gray eyes giving nothing away. Ellie crossed the room and set the envelope on his desk. "I'm giving it back." Dante frowned. "Why?" "I didn't save your mother for money," Ellie said, her voice calm but solid. "I saved her because it was the right thing to do. If I take this, it turns what I did into a transaction, and I don't want that." Dante stood, came around the desk, stopped close. He was nearly a head taller than she was, his shadow falling over her like it meant to swallow her whole. But Ellie didn't step back. "This is my gratitude," Dante said, his voice low and cold. "You saved my mother's life. You deserve to be repaid." Ellie shook her head. "You already paid my grandmother's bill, $187,000. That's more than enough. I don't need anything else." Dante looked at her like she was something not quite human. In his 36 years, no one had ever refused his money. No one. "You're foolish," he said. Ellie smiled. "Small, steady, not afraid at all. Maybe, but I sleep at night." She turned and walked out of his office without waiting for his reaction. The door closed behind her. Dante stood there staring at the envelope on his desk, then at the door that had just shut. Marco stepped in and asked quietly, "Boss, what's wrong with her?" Dante didn't answer. For the first time in years, someone had made him genuinely curious. 1 week after Ellie returned the $20,000, she was called into the manager's office at St. Clair's Hospital. The department head sat behind the desk, her face hard as stone, not meeting Ellie's eyes as she spoke. "Miss Bennet, in the past month, you've taken too many days off. We understand your situation, but the hospital can't continue like this. We have to let you go." Ellie felt like someone had just punched her in the chest. "But I only took a few days to care for an emergency patient. I've worked here for 5 years. I've never missed a shift, never been late." The department head sighed. "I know, Miss Bennet, but the hospital is cutting staff. The budget is tight, and you have the least seniority in the department." Ellie understood. She understood very clearly. The hospital needed a reason to fire someone, and the days she'd taken off to care for Vivian were the perfect excuse. She was the easiest target, no powerful family, no connections, no one to protect her, just a poor nurse no one would remember once she was gone. Ellie walked out of the hospital like a woman without a soul. Snow was falling, white flakes settling on the thin shoulders of her coat. But she didn't feel cold. She didn't feel anything. Her feet carried her without direction through familiar streets until she realized she was sitting on a stone bench in the small park near her apartment. No one else around, only her and the falling snow. Then everything hit her at once. No job meant no money. No money meant no rent. No rent, no medicine for Gran. No way to take care of the only family she had left. Ellie had tried. She had tried for 16 years since her mother died. She'd studied hard, worked without stopping, endured every hardship without a single complaint. She had done everything the right way, and life still wouldn't let her go. The tears came. Ellie cried, the sound raw in the empty park. "Mom," she whispered to the gray sky. I tried as hard as I could. Why is it still not enough? Why won't life give me one chance?" A hand settled on her shoulder. Lily, her closest co-worker at the hospital, had run after her and caught up without Ellie even noticing. Lily sat beside her, pulled Ellie into her arms, said nothing, simply held her while she cried until she had no tears left. "It's going to be okay," Lily said. "You'll find another job. You're the best nurse I know." Ellie wanted to believe that, but she knew reality was harsher than that. No one wanted to hire a nurse who'd just been fired. No one. At the same time, at the Cross Mansion, Vivian was calling Ellie. She'd been calling every day all week, checking on her. But today Ellie's voice was different, shaking, thick with tears. When Vivian asked what was wrong, Ellie went quiet for a long time. Then finally admitted it. "I lost my job, Mrs. Vivian." Vivian's heart tightened. "Stay right there. I'll help." Ellie blurted, "No, I don't need pity. I'll figure it out myself." Vivian shook her head even though Ellie couldn't see. "This isn't pity, Ellie. This is family." She set the phone down and went straight to Dante's office. He was reading reports. He looked up when he saw his mother enter with a serious expression. "The girl who saved my life just lost her job," Vivian said simply. Dante frowned. "And give her a job. Cross Medical Center needs nurses." Dante set the report down and looked at his mother. "You want me to hire a stranger into my empire. You know how dangerous that is." Vivian stepped closer and held his gaze. "She isn't a stranger. She's our benefactor. She saved my life, took care of me for 10 days, and then refused the $20,000 you offered." In your entire life, how many people like that have you met? Dante fell silent. The answer was none. Not once. You owe her, Dante, Vivian said, her voice gentle but firm, and this is your chance to pay that debt. The next day, Marco appeared at Ellie's apartment door with an envelope. Inside was a job offer from Cross Medical Center, the most luxurious private hospital in Chicago, one of the Cross family's legal businesses. The salary was double her old pay, night shift nursing position. Along with it was a handwritten note from Vivian. This isn't charity. This is an opportunity you deserve. If you're good, you keep the job. If you aren't, you get fired like anyone else. Prove I was right to trust you. Ellie held the letter in her hands and tears fell again, but this time they were tears of hope. She looked at Marco and nodded. Tell Mrs. Vivian I won't disappoint her. She didn't know that when she walked through the doors of Cross Medical Center, she was stepping into Dante Cross's world. And that world was going to change her forever. 3 weeks had passed since the day Ellie first walked into Cross Medical Center. This hospital was nothing like St. Clair's. Everything here was modern and grand, from the marble, tiled corridors to the most expensive medical equipment she'd never even been allowed to touch before. The patients here were Chicago's upper class, people who could pay tens of thousands of dollars for a single night in a hospital bed without thinking twice. And her co-workers, they looked at her with suspicion from day one. She got in here through connections. They whispered behind her back. There's definitely something between her and the Cross family. Ellie heard every word, said nothing. Kept her head down, worked harder than anyone else, proving she deserved to be here, and she proved it. After 3 weeks, no one could deny Ellie's ability. She moved fast and sure, precise, always willing to take an extra shift when someone else needed time off. She treated every patient the same, from wealthy businessmen to the cleaning staff. Slowly, her co-workers' suspicious looks shifted into reluctant respect. But Ellie didn't care about that. She still lived in her old apartment on the south side, still saved every dollar, still took the bus to work every day. Her pay was higher, but she poured it into Grant's care. Vivian came to the hospital often under the excuse of routine checkups. But really, it was to see Ellie. They ate lunch together in the staff cafeteria, talking like mother and daughter. Vivian told her about Dante, about the boy who used to laugh, about how he changed after his father died. My son wasn't born cold, she said, her eyes distant with sadness. When he was little, he laughed all the time. He loved reading, loved drawing, loved running through the garden chasing butterflies. Then his father died, and my son's smile died with him. Ellie listened without speaking. But she began to understand more about the man all of Chicago feared. One afternoon, Dante came to the hospital to sign papers. As he passed the 3rd floor corridor, he heard a familiar voice drifting out from the nurse's station. He stopped, stood behind the corner, and listened. Ellie was on the phone, her voice bright and warm. "Grandma, I'm okay. The new job is really good. Everyone's friendly. Don't worry about me. Just rest and take your medicine. I'll come see you this weekend." She laughed. A soft laugh like spring wind. "No, I'm not lacking anything. I've got enough money. You don't have to worry." Dante looked through the gap in the doorway. He watched Ellie hang up, and the smile on her mouth vanished at once. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying before she made the call. He saw her sit down, cover her face with both hands, her shoulders trembling. Then she drew a long breath, wiped her tears, stood up, and walked out with a calm expression as if nothing had happened. He knew what had happened earlier. A difficult patient had just cursed her out because she'd arrived 2 minutes late, and he'd heard other nurses talking about her behind her back. Yet she still told Gran, "I'm okay." She lied so the only family she had could feel at peace. She swallowed her tears. So Gran wouldn't worry. Dante stood there for a long time, watching her thin figure disappear at the end of the corridor. For the first time he saw quiet sacrifice. For the first time he understood why his mother trusted this girl so deeply. That night the sky opened, rain pouring down in sheets. Ellie finished her shift at 11, stepped out into the parking lot, and realized she didn't have an umbrella. She stood under the awning, staring at the rain, calculating whether she should run to the bus stop 200 meters away. Then a black SUV pulled up right in front of her. The window rolled down. Dante sat inside, looking at her with unreadable gray eyes. "Get in, I'll drive you home." Ellie shook her head. "No need, I can take the bus." Dante frowned. "The last bus left 20 minutes ago. Don't be stubborn." Ellie hesitated, then opened the door and climbed in. The car was warm, smelled of expensive leather. They rode in silence as the car moved through slick, rain-washed streets. Dante eyes fixed ahead, Ellie hands in her lap, tense. Then Dante broke the silence. "You're doing well. Management told me." Ellie turned to him. "I work for my patients, not for your praise." Dante gave the smallest hint of a smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. It was the first time Ellie had ever seen him smile. "Are you always this stubborn?" Ellie smiled too. "Only when I have to be." The car stopped at a red light. They turned and looked at each other, and in that moment something shifted. Then they both looked away, as if afraid of what they might see in the other's eyes. When the SUV stopped in front of Ellie's apartment, she opened the door and stepped out, then turned back. "Thank you for the ride." Dante nodded, said nothing. Ellie went inside. When she turned on the light, she looked out through the window. The black SUV was still parked there under the rain, as if it were waiting for something. Her heart jumped just once. "Why am I like this?" she asked herself. Inside the car, Dante still sat there, watching the light come on in her window. For the first time in years, there was someone he didn't want to leave. 2 weeks after that rainy night, Dante Cross sat in his dark office, a whiskey glass in his hand, long since empty. He couldn't be bothered to pour another. He was thinking about the brown-haired girl with eyes that didn't know fear. He thought about her smile in the car that night, about the way she'd said "only when I have to" with that stubborn, almost sweet defiance. He was thinking about her more than he should, and it made him angry. Dante Cross wasn't allowed to have feelings. Feelings were weakness. Weakness got used by enemies. 22 years ago, he had learned that lesson when his father fell into a pool of blood. He couldn't make the same mistake. He needed a reason to push her away. He needed to find something ugly about her. Anything at all, to prove she was like everyone else, just trying to use him. Dante summoned Marco to his office. "Investigate Ellie Bennett," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Everything, her family, her relationships, her finances. Find out what she really wants." Marco looked at him, surprised. "Boss, is there something wrong with her? I thought she'd already been vetted." Dante gritted his teeth. "No one is good without conditions. Find her real motive. That's an order." 3 days later, Marco returned with a thick report. Ellie Bennett, 28 years old, lost her mother at 12 in a car accident. Father left when she was small, whereabouts unknown. Raised by her grandmother, graduated top of her nursing program, worked at St. Clair's Hospital for 5 years. No criminal record, no debt except Gran's hospital bills, which Dante had paid. No ties to any organization. Marco set the report on the desk and looked Dante straight in the eye. "She's clean, boss, cleaner than anyone I've ever investigated. She really is just a poor nurse with a heart that's too big." Dante was silent for a long time, then said, "Keep watching." In the days that followed, Ellie began to notice something was off. The familiar black car appearing on the corner every time she left home, strangers asking her neighbors about her routines, about the people she met. The old woman across the hall told her someone had come by asking whether Ellie ever brought strange men home. Ellie understood immediately. She knew exactly who was behind it. That afternoon, Ellie didn't go to the hospital. She went straight to Cross Tower, crossed the lobby without waiting for anyone to escort her, rode the elevator to the 50th floor, and stormed into Dante's office. He was sitting behind his desk, not looking surprised at all to see her. "You've got people following me," Ellie said, her voice shaking with anger, though she tried to hold it down. Dante didn't deny it. He stood, came around the desk, faced her. "I need to know who you are." Ellie laughed, bitter. "I already told you. I'm a nurse. I saved your mother. What else do you want?" Dante stepped closer, crowding her, his shadow falling over her. "I want to know what you really want. No one is kind without a motive. What are you waiting for? Money, power, or are you working for someone?" Ellie didn't step back. Even though her heart was pounding hard enough to break ribs, she held his gaze. Those cold gray eyes she'd seen go warm on that rainy night. "Do you know what your problem is, Dante Cross?" she asked, her voice ringing through the quiet room. "You've lived in the dark so long you forgot light exists. You think everyone is like you, everyone calculating, everyone using people. But not everyone is. There are people who do good only because it's the right thing. But you can't believe that, can you? Because if you do, you'll have to admit you've been living the wrong way for 22 years. Her eyes were red. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't let him see her weak. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice thick. "I just want you to leave me alone." She turned and walked out of the office, and this time she didn't look back. The next day, Ellie submitted her resignation at Cross Medical Center. She didn't explain why, only said she'd found another job. But Vivian knew the truth. She called Ellie and heard the young woman's voice shaking as she said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vivian. I can't work somewhere I'm suspected every second. I tried, but I can't keep doing this." Vivian went to see Dante that same afternoon. She walked into his office, her eyes blazing with anger. "What did you do to her?" Dante wouldn't look at his mother. "I was protecting the family." Vivian slammed her hand down on the desk. "By hurting the person who saved my life. You know she's good, you know it, but you're afraid. You're afraid to open your heart to anyone. You're afraid of getting hurt the way you were hurt when your father died." She stepped closer, took her son's face in her hands, forced him to look at her. 22 years, Dante, since your father died. You've locked yourself in the dark. You don't let anyone close. And now, when there's finally a girl, a good and honest girl, you push her away." Tears slid down Vivian's cheeks. "You're not a monster, Dante. I know that. But if you keep living like this, you'll become one for real." Vivian left, and Dante was alone in the dark office again. He sat there staring into nothing, and for the first time in his life, he saw himself through someone else's eyes. He saw a man who was lonely and cold, pushing away everyone who cared. He saw a 14-year-old boy who was still afraid, still running, still building walls so high no one could touch his heart, and he hated what he saw. 5 days had passed since the argument in that 50th floor office. Ellie had gone back to work at St. Clair's. They took her back at lower pay and worse shifts, but she didn't care. At least here, no one followed her. No one suspected her. No one looked at her like she was a con artist waiting for her moment. She worked, went home, visited Gran, then went back to work. Life slid back into the shape it had before she ever found Vivian Cross in a dark alley, as if everything had been nothing but a dream. But every night Ellie still thought about him, about those cold gray eyes that had once gone warm on a rainy night, about the rare smile that touched his mouth when she said, "Only when I have to," about the way he cried when he held his mother like a lost child who'd finally found the road home. She was angry that he hadn't trusted her, but she was also sad, sad for a man who'd lived inside suspicion for 22 years. Unable to believe anyone, unable to open his heart to anyone, on the 5th night, rain came down again. Ellie finished her shift at 10, stepped out of St. Clair's, stood under the awning waiting for the rain to ease. No umbrella, as usual, calculating whether she should run for the bus stop, and then she saw a figure standing across the street. Through the white curtain of rain, she recognized him immediately, Dante Cross standing there alone. No umbrella, no car, no guards, his black coat soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead, but he stayed right there. Looking at her, Ellie meant to turn away, but her legs didn't listen. She stepped out from under the awning, crossed the street, stopped in front of him, rain hitting her shoulders, bitter cold, but she didn't care. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice colder than the rain. Dante looked at her, and Ellie saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not coldness, not suspicion, pain and fear. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough from standing too long in the freezing rain. Ellie didn't speak. She only stood there and watched him. Dante went on word by word, as if he were learning how to speak again from the beginning. "I was wrong. I suspected you without reason. I had people follow you. I hurt you, and I'm sorry." Ellie gave a bitter little laugh. "Then why? You said it yourself. You needed to know who I was. You investigated me. You know everything about me. So why didn't you trust me?" Dante was silent for a long time. Rain kept falling, soaking them both, but neither of them moved. Then he spoke, so quietly Ellie had to lean in to catch it. "I was afraid." Ellie frowned. "Afraid of what? I'm just a poor nurse. I don't have anything you should be afraid of." Dante lifted his head, looked straight into her eyes, and for the first time she saw him truly as himself. No mask, no walls. Just a man trembling in the cold rain. "I'm afraid of you, Ellie. Afraid of what you make me feel." Ellie stood there, her heart skipping a beat. Dante kept going, as if once he'd opened his mouth, he couldn't stop. 22 years since my father died. I haven't allowed myself to be weak. Feelings are weakness. Anyone who matters to me becomes a target for my enemies. I lost my father because of that. I almost lost my mother because of that. I didn't want to drag you into my dangerous world. I thought if I found something ugly about you, I'd have a reason to push you away. But you're clean, you're pure, you're better than anyone I've ever met. And that scares me more." Ellie didn't know what to say. She looked at the man in front of her, the mob boss all of Chicago feared, standing drenched in rain, apologizing like a boy who'd done wrong. She let out a breath, then did something that surprised even her. She took the knit cap off her own head and put it on his. It looked ridiculous, a cheap knit cap on the head of a billionaire, but at least it shielded him from the rain. "Come inside," she said. "You're going to catch a cold." Dante stared at her, his eyes widening slightly. "You forgive me?" Ellie shook her head. "I don't know. I need time." She looked at him, and her voice softened just a little. "But I don't hate you anymore." Dante looked at her, and for the first time in 5 days, he felt like he could breathe. "That's a start," he said. They stood there a little longer in the rain and the dim glow of the streetlights. Two people from two different worlds, both soaked through, both shivering, and neither of them wanting to be the first to walk away. 2 weeks after that rainy night, things began to shift slowly, almost quietly. Ellie returned to Cross Medical Center at Dante's request. And this time no one followed her anymore. They saw each other more often, sometimes at the hospital, sometimes over lunches with Vivian. Their relationship was still cautious, like two people learning to trust from the very beginning. But something between them was warming little by little. Dante no longer looked at her with suspicion, and Ellie began to catch glimpses of the real man behind his cold shell. That Saturday night, Vivian invited Ellie to the Cross Mansion for dinner. "Just a family meal," she said over the phone, her voice warm the way a mother calls her daughter home. Ellie agreed, even though she was nervous. She had never been to the Cross estate before. The place, people whispered, held more secrets than a cemetery. The Cross Mansion sat on a hill on the North Shore, surrounded by tall walls and ancient trees. When the car Mako drove carried Ellie through the gates, she couldn't help holding her breath at the sheer size of it. The house was bigger than the entire apartment building where she lived. Towering windows, golden light spilling into the night. Ellie arrived earlier than expected. A housekeeper led her to the back garden to wait. "Mrs. Vivian will be down soon," the housekeeper said, then disappeared. Ellie wandered through the vast garden, watching roses bloom under moonlight. Then she heard shouting coming from a small outbuilding at the far end of the grounds. A man's voice, screaming in pain, her heart clenched. What was happening? Was someone hurt? The nurse in her woke up on instinct. She ran toward the sound, thinking someone might need help. The door to the outbuilding was cracked open. Ellie crept closer, worried, but when she looked through the narrow gap, she wished she hadn't. Dante stood in the middle of the room, his white shirt speckled with blood. In front of him, a man was tied to a chair, his face swollen, blood running from his nose and mouth. Mako stood beside him with an iron bar in his hand, and Dante held a gun, pressing it to the man's knee. "Tell me what Hart is planning." Dante's voice was ice, not a trace of the warmth Ellie had seen in him. "Tell me, or I'll blow out your other knee." The man moaned and begged, then the gun fired. A scream ripped through the room. Blood sprayed dark red against the concrete floor. Ellie clapped a hand over her mouth to trap her own scream. She stumbled backward, legs shaking, and bumped a plant pot by the door. The sound rang out in the sudden stillness. Dante lifted his head, his eyes snapping toward the doorway, and he saw her. Their eyes met through the narrow crack. Ellie saw fear in his gaze, not fear of being caught, but fear that she was seeing the truth of him. She turned and ran. Ellie ran through the garden without knowing where she was going, only needing to get away. Tears streaming down her cheeks, the image of Dante with the gun in his hand, blood on his shirt, his cold voice as he tortured that man. It chased her like a nightmare. This was who he really was. This was his real world, and she had been naive enough to think she could belong in it. Vivian found her sitting on a stone bench in a far corner of the garden. Trembling, Vivian pulled her close and stroked her hair gently. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked softly. Ellie nodded, unable to speak. Vivian let out a tired breath. "I know. I hate violence. I've argued with Dante about this for 20 years. She held Ellie's hand, her voice lowering. "But you need to understand that man is one of Hart's enforcers. He tried to kidnap me last week. If Dante hadn't stopped him, I wouldn't be sitting here with you." Ellie looked at her, eyes still wet and red. "But he shot him. He tortured him." Vivian nodded. "In Dante's world, if he doesn't do that, the enemy kills all of us. It's a game he didn't choose. But he has to play it to survive." She looked at Ellie with deep understanding in her eyes. "You don't have to accept it. You only have to understand it. Dante isn't a good man, but he isn't a monster either. He's a man trapped between light and darkness, trying to protect the people he loves in the only way he knows how. Ellie sat there a long time, turning those words over in her mind. Then she heard footsteps. Dante stepped out of the shadows, changed into a clean shirt, but she still saw the faint smear of blood on his wrist that he hadn't washed away. He stopped a few steps from her, not daring to come closer. "You're afraid of me now, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low and full of hurt. Ellie stood and faced him. "Yes," she said honestly, "I'm afraid." Dante closed his eyes as if the answer had cut him straight through. "I understand. You should stay away from me. You shouldn't get involved with someone like me." But Ellie didn't turn away. She looked at him, really looked into gray eyes heavy with pain. She saw fear there too. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being hated, fear of losing someone he was just beginning to care about. She remembered what Vivian had said. She remembered the night he stood in the rain and apologized. She remembered the way he cried when he held his mother. "I'm afraid," she repeated, "but I also see you did it to protect your mother, to protect the people you love." She stepped forward once, closing the distance. "I don't agree with how you do it. I don't know if I can accept it, but I understand why." Dante stared at her, his eyes widening with shock. "You're not disgusted by me?" Ellie shook her head. "I don't know what I feel, but I'm not leaving." They stood there in the dark garden under moonlight, only one step apart. Between them lay darkness and light, violence and kindness, fear and hope. Ellie didn't know what the future would look like, but she knew one thing: she couldn't walk away. A month had passed since the night Ellie witnessed Dante's dark side in the small outbuilding. Their relationship had changed. It was no longer suspicion or careful distance, but something deeper, warmer. They ate dinner together every week at the Cross Mansion. With Vivian, like a real family, Dante stayed cold to the outside world. But when he was with Ellie, he allowed himself to smile, and Ellie was learning how to see light inside his darkness. That night, Ellie was having dinner with Dante and Vivian in the mansion's grand dining room. They were laughing over a story from Dante's childhood Vivian was telling about the 10-year-old boy who once hid in a closet all day because he was terrified of going to the dentist. Dante looked at his mother with mock embarrassment, and Ellie laughed until tears ran down her face. It was one of those rare moments when she felt peaceful, when she felt like she belonged here. Then her phone rang, St. Clair's Hospital. Ellie answered, and her world collapsed in an instant. "Miss Bennet, your grandmother Ruth, her condition has suddenly worsened. The tumor has spread to her heart. She needs surgery immediately." Ellie felt all the air pulled out of her lungs. "The chances of success?" she asked, her voice shaking. There was a pause on the other end. Then the doctor said, 30%, ma'am. Her heart is very weak. We'll do everything we can, but you should prepare yourself. The phone slipped from Ellie's hand and hit the floor with a dull crack. She stood there, eyes wide, seeing nothing. Gran, the only person who had been beside her for 16 years. The woman who raised her, who wiped her tears every time she cried for her mom, who worked herself to exhaustion so Ellie could afford school. Gran, the person Ellie loved more than her own life. "My grandma," Ellie whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "My grandma." Dante stood up immediately. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He saw it all in her eyes. He took her hand, his voice low and steady. "Come on. I'm taking you there now." They got into the car, and Dante drove like a man possessed through the night city, running red lights, flying down empty streets. Ellie sat beside him, shaking, tears spilling without stopping. She prayed to anyone who might be listening. "Please don't take her from me. Please give me more time." When they reached St. Clair's, Gran had already been taken into emergency care. Ellie ran to the window and saw her grandmother lying there, small and fragile, an oxygen mask covering half her face, wires and machines all around. Ellie dropped to her knees by the bed and gripped Gran's wrinkled hand. "Grandma, don't leave me." Gran opened her eyes, weak, but she still tried to smile when she saw her granddaughter. "My girl, don't cry. I'm old now." Ellie shook her head, tears dripping onto Gran's hand. No, you promised me. You promised you'd stay with me. You promised you'd see me in a wedding dress. You promised. Dante stood in the hallway, watching through the glass, and his chest tightened as if someone were crushing his heart in a fist. He pulled out his phone and started making calls, one after another. Find me the best heart surgeon in the United States. I don't care where they are. New York, Los Angeles, get them to Chicago tonight. Money is no limit. Over the next 2 hours, 3 top specialists were brought in on a private jet. Dr. Samuel Grant, the most famous heart surgeon on the East Coast, came in person to perform the operation. Gran was taken into surgery, the doors shut, and Ellie collapsed into a chair in the hallway as if her legs no longer had strength to hold her up. Dante sat down beside her. He didn't speak. He just stayed. They sat like that for hours, watching the wall clock bleed away minute by minute. Ellie cried until there were no tears left. Then she only sat there, hands clenched together, praying in silence. She's everything to me. Ellie whispered into the emptiness, if she goes, I'll have no one left in this world. Dante turned to her, and he did something he had never done with anyone. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, letting her cry into his shoulder. You still have me, he said, his voice low and gentle. If you want. Ellie lifted her face and stared at him through tears. What did you just say? Dante didn't answer right away. He looked into her red eyes, and for the first time, he began to tell her something he'd never told anyone but his mother. When I was 14, I watched my father die in front of me. He was on the floor, blood everywhere, and I couldn't do anything. I just stood there and watched him go. His voice caught. Since that day, I've been afraid. Afraid of losing the people I love. Afraid of caring about someone and then watching them get taken away. So I locked my heart. I didn't let anyone close. I thought that would keep me safe. He looked at her, his gray eyes glinting under the hospital lights. But then I met you, and I realized I don't want safe anymore. Ellie stayed silent, tears rising again. Dante lifted his hand and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. I don't know what love is, Ellie. I don't know how to care about someone the right way. I've lived in the dark too long. He looked at her more sincerely than she'd ever seen him. But with you, I want to learn. If you'll give me the chance. Ellie couldn't speak. She only squeezed his hand tighter, and they sat there in the quiet hospital corridor, waiting, between fear and hope, between darkness and light. 2 wounded hearts finding each other. 6 hours that felt like an entire lifetime. Ellie and Dante sat on the row of chairs outside the operating room, neither of them speaking a single word. Vivian had arrived at midnight, sitting beside them, holding Ellie's hand to lend her strength. The clock on the wall ticked off each second, and with every second, Ellie felt herself dying a little more. She had prayed every prayer she knew, made promises to anyone who might be listening, that she would do anything if they let Gran live. Anything. Then the operating room doors opened. Dr. Grant stepped out, pulled off his mask, his face exhausted, but his eyes holding a glimmer of something. Ellie sprang to her feet, her heart stopping. She couldn't finish the question. Dr. Grant smiled, the first smile she'd seen all night. The surgery was successful. She needs time to recover, but she's going to live. Ellie didn't hear anything after that. The world dissolved, leaving only 4 words echoing in her head. She's going to live. She's going to live. Her knees gave out, and she broke down, sobbing. Not the jagged grief she'd been carrying all night, but the sobs of relief, of fierce joy, of someone pulled back from the very edge. And then, without thinking, without hesitating, she turned to Dante and threw her arms around him. It was the first time she had reached for him first. Dante stood there, his body going rigid with surprise. He wasn't used to being held. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him except his mother. But then, slowly, he put his arms around her and held on tight. He felt her shaking against him, felt her tears soaking through his shirt, and he realized he was crying too, the second time in 20 years. Thank you. Ellie whispered into his shoulder, "Thank you. Thank you for saving her." Vivian stood beside them, watching the two young people holding each other, and she smiled, the smile of a mother watching her son finally find happiness. 2 days later, Gran woke up. Ellie had sat by her bed the entire time, never leaving for even a moment. When Gran opened her eyes and saw her granddaughter, she tried to smile. "My girl, why do you look so awful? Have you not slept in days?" Ellie laughed through tears. "If you still have enough strength to tease me, you're doing fine." Gran took Ellie's hand, weak but warm. "I'm not going anywhere. I still have to see you in a wedding dress." Then Gran noticed Dante standing in the corner of the room, silent as a shadow. She narrowed her eyes at him, and Ellie's heart thumped harder. Gran knew who Dante Cross was. Everyone in Chicago did. "Who are you?" Gran asked, her voice weak but still sharp. Ellie hurried, "Grandma, this is Dante, my friend." Gran looked Dante up and down, then looked at Ellie, then back at Dante. "You're Dante Cross." "I know you. People talk about you, not in a good way." Dante stepped closer to the bed, not avoiding the old woman's piercing gaze. "They're not wrong," he said honestly. "I'm not a good man." Gran was quiet for a long moment, studying him as if she were reading every thought inside his head. Then she spoke, her voice softer. "How long have you been here?" Dante didn't understand the question. Gran pointed at the chair by the bed where a blanket, it was neatly folded, and a pillow lay waiting. "The nurse told me a man has been sitting here for 2 days, not leaving, taking care of my granddaughter when she fell asleep from exhaustion. Was that you?" Dante didn't answer, but his silence was the answer. Gran watched him, then watched the way he watched Ellie, the way his eyes softened when her granddaughter smiled, the way he moved closer without thinking when Ellie coughed from days without sleep. "You look at my granddaughter like she's your whole world," Gran said, her voice catching. Dante looked startled. "How do I look at her?" Gran smiled, the smile of someone who had lived long enough to see through people, the way my husband looked at me once. "Like if you lose her, you'll lose your whole world." Gran reached for Dante's hand, her wrinkled palm warm around his. "Good or bad, I don't know, and I don't care what people say about you. I only know one thing. You love my girl for real, and that's enough for me." That night, after Gran had fallen asleep again, and Vivian had gone back to the mansion to rest, Ellie and Dante sat on a bench in the hospital corridor. The lights were dim, the air quiet. Except for the soft beeps drifting from patient rooms, Ellie leaned her head against Dante's shoulder, exhausted but calm. "Thank you," she said, for what felt like the 100th time in 2 days. "For everything." Dante looked down at her. "Don't thank me. I did it because I wanted to." Ellie lifted her face and looked into his eyes. "You said you want to learn how to love. Did you mean it?" Dante didn't answer with words. He looked at her, at the brown eyes shining under the lights, at the loose strands of hair on her forehead, at lips a little dry from days of forgetting herself. Then he leaned down and pressed his mouth to hers, their first kiss, gentle, hesitant, like two people learning how to love from the very beginning. But real, realer than anything Dante had done in his life. When they pulled apart, Ellie looked at him, her cheeks flushed. "You still didn't answer my question." Dante smiled, that rare smile only she ever got to see. "I've never meant anything more." They sat there hand in hand in the quiet hospital corridor. Two people from two different worlds, finding each other between darkness and light. Ellie didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know whether she could live in Dante's world, but she knew one thing. Right now, here, she wanted to be with him. And that was enough. 2 weeks had passed since their first kiss in the hospital corridor. Gran was recovering well now, able to sit up and talk more. Ellie spent every spare moment at her bedside, and Dante tightened security around the hospital. He knew Leon Hart was still out there, waiting for an opening. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, but he didn't expect the enemy to strike so soon. That afternoon, Dante was sitting in his office at Cross Tower when his phone rang. An unknown number, he answered, and the voice on the other end turned his blood to ice. Blackwood Jr. It's been a long time, Leon Hart. The same voice as 22 years ago. Cold, mocking. Dante clenched the phone so hard his knuckles went white, forcing down the rage rising in his chest. Hart, what do you want? Leon laughed, a rasp like a crow's call. I just want to remind you of something. 22 years ago, your father thought he was untouchable. He thought no one would dare lay a hand on the Cross family. And you know what happened next. Dante bared his teeth, the image of his father collapsing into blood on white marble, flashing sharp and brutal in his mind. The gunshot, his mother's scream, the spreading stain, and the man standing there smiling. You killed my father, Dante said, his voice trembling from the effort of holding back fury. Leon gave a theatrical sigh. I only took advantage of an opportunity. Business, you understand. And now I see you've got a new weakness. His voice dropped. Thick with threat, that brown-haired girl, that poor little nurse you're in love with. She matters to you, doesn't she? Dante shot to his feet, the office chair crashing backward. Touch her and Leon cut him off, his tone turning cold. You'll what? Kill me? Plenty have tried, Cross Jr. They all failed. He gave a short, contemptuous laugh. We'll see each other soon. Then he hung up. Dante lost control. He swept his arm across the desk, sending everything flying. Papers scattering like wounded birds. A coffee cup shattering, a laptop hitting the floor with a harsh crack. He punched the wall once, twice, 3 times until his fist bled. Marco rushed in, staring at the wreckage with alarm. Boss, what happened? Dante whipped around, his eyes red. Double the protection on Ellie and Gran. Immediately. Hart is about to move, but it was already too late. At the same time, at St. Clair's shift change was underway, the most chaotic time of day, when the morning nurses handed off to the afternoon nurses, when security rotated, when attention splintered in every direction. Taking advantage of a coordinated distraction, a small explosion and a staged fire alarm in the opposite wing, 2 people in nurse uniforms entered Gran's room. Faces hidden behind masks. Gran was asleep. They didn't speak. They moved fast, wheeling her bed out into the hallway, into the staff elevator, down to the basement where an ambulance was waiting. With the guards occupied by the chaos downstairs, nobody questioned the hurried medical team. Nobody stopped them. It was over in less than 5 minutes. As soon as the fire alarm was declared a false start and the chaos began to settle, Ellie rushed to Gran's room, her heart racing with an inexplicable dread. The room was empty. Gran's bed was gone. Ellie ran to the nurse's station, panic ripping through her voice. Where's Gran? Where's my grandmother? The nurse on duty looked at her, confused. She was taken for testing just as the alarm went off, maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. 2 of our nurses brought her. Ellie went pale. I didn't request any tests. Her phone rang, a text from an unknown number. She opened it, and the world collapsed beneath her feet. A photo of Gran tied to a chair, mouth taped shut. Eyes wide with terror, beneath it, a message. Want the old woman alive, trade for the girl. Abandoned warehouse. Pier 22. Midnight. Alone. If Cross shows, the old woman dies. Ellie didn't remember how she got to Cross Tower. She only knew that when she stood in Dante's office, she was shaking so hard she couldn't control it. Tears streaming down her face, she held out her phone and made him look at the photo. Dante saw it, and his face changed. Hart, he snarled, hatred tearing through his voice. He kidnapped Gran to lure you out. He wants you. Ellie nodded, forcing herself to stay steady even as her heart shattered. I'll go. Dante spun on her. What? No, absolutely not. Ellie looked at him, her eyes swollen and red, but unbreakable. She's my grandmother, Dante. She raised me. She was everything to me before I met you. I can't let her die because of me. Dante stepped in, gripped her shoulders, held her as if she might disappear. You think I'm going to let you walk into your death alone? Hot will kill you, Ellie. He doesn't intend to release Gran. He just wants to use you to hurt me. Ellie stared at him, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then what do you want me to do? Sit here and wait while they kill my grandmother. She pressed her hand to Dante's chest where his heart was beating like a drum gone mad. I know you want to protect me, but Gran is the only person I've had for 28 years. She raised me when my mother died. She worked herself to exhaustion so I could go to school. She was my mother, my father, my everything. Her voice broke. I can't live if I lose her, Dante. I can't. Dante looked at her, pain cutting through him like a blade. He knew she would go. No matter how he tried to stop her, she was stubborn the way he was, willing to trade anything for the people she loved. Fine, he said, his voice low and hard. You'll go, but I'll be right behind you. Marco will lead the team and surround the area. When Hart shows himself, we hit. He lifted her chin and forced her to meet his eyes. When you hear gunfire, you get down. You understand, get down, and don't move until I find you. Ellie nodded. Trembling, Dante pulled her into his arms and held her tight, as if it might be the last time. I won't lose you, he whispered into her hair. I promise. Night fell. Ellie stepped into the darkness, heading for the abandoned warehouse where Gran was waiting. She knew she might not survive, but she also knew she had no other choice. Midnight. Pier 22 lay silent in the dark. Abandoned warehouses rising like enormous ghosts along the edge of the Chicago River, wind blowing off the water, cutting cold, carrying the smell of rust and dead fish. Ellie walked alone on the uneven dirt road, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. She knew Dante was somewhere behind her in the darkness. She knew Marco and the team had surrounded the area. But it didn't make her any less afraid. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for Gran, afraid that by the time she reached her, it would already be too late. The door of the abandoned warehouse stood open in front of her, a weak yellow light leaking out from inside. Ellie drew a deep breath, then stepped in. Gran sat on a wooden chair in the middle of the warehouse, hands and feet bound, mouth covered with tape. Her eyes went wide when she saw her granddaughter. She shook her head wildly, trying to tell Ellie to run. But Ellie didn't run. She walked straight toward Gran, until a figure stepped out of the shadows and blocked her path. Leon Hart, 60, 3 years old, white hair, a bony face and eyes as cold as a snake's. Beside him, Victor Crane, his trusted enforcer. The man who had attacked Vivian in the dark alley months earlier. Brave girl, Leon said, his voice rough with mockery. Or stupid, I haven't decided yet. Ellie held her spine straight, fought to keep her voice from shaking. Let my grandmother go. You wanted me. I'm here. Leon laughed, the sound echoing in the empty warehouse. You think it's that simple? You think I'll let this old woman go just because you showed up? He stepped closer, looking Ellie up and down as if he were putting a price on something. Do you know why I hate the Cross family? Ellie didn't answer. She only stared at him with hatred. Leon didn't need an answer because Edward Cross was my best friend. I stood beside him for 20 years, building that empire with him. Ellie frowned. Then, why did you kill him? Leon looked at her, his eyes like 2 pits of ice. Because of money, naive girl. Edward's enemies paid me a sum I couldn't refuse. that's all. He let out a theatrical sigh. I've invented enough reasons over the years to sleep better. I told myself my wife died because of Edward. I told myself he betrayed me. But the truth is, I killed him for money, and I'll kill his son for the same reason. Ellie shuddered. She had met evil people before, but never anyone like Leon. Someone who killed not from hatred, not from pain, but only for profit. A monster with no heart. You're a monster, she said, her voice trembling but thick with contempt. Leon chuckled. I'm practical, just like you trading your life for this old woman. That's a transaction too. Ellie shook her head. No, that's love, but you wouldn't understand. People like you can't. Leon raised an eyebrow. Amused, then he pulled out a gun and aimed it at Ellie's head. Interesting, but the conversation ends here. When Cross finds your body, he'll understand what it feels like to lose someone he loves. In that same instant, gunfire exploded from outside. The lights in the warehouse snapped off. Darkness swallowed everything. Chaos began. Dante stormed in through the back entrance. Marco and the elite team tight behind him. Shots cracked again and again. Screams, bullets slicing the air. Leon shouted orders to his men, then vanished into the dark. Victor Crane yanked out his gun and aimed at Ellie. She stood there frozen, no time to react, seeing only the black barrel pointed straight at her. Then Mako appeared from nowhere. He lunged, shoved Ellie down to the floor, and the bullet meant for her tore through his chest. Mako collapsed. Blood spilling from the wound, but he still forced out words, broken and thin. Boss, protect her. Then his eyes closed. Dante roared, Mako. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a wounded animal's cry. In that flash of pain, he swung his gun toward Victor Crane and fired. One shot, two, three. Victor dropped and never got back up. Leon tried to escape through the back door, firing wildly behind him. One bullet flew toward Gran. Ellie didn't think. She threw herself forward, using her body to shield her grandmother. The bullet punched through her shoulder, pain like fire, but she didn't scream. She only wrapped Gran tight. Covering her from the rest, Dante chased Leon, the two of them crashing into each other in the dark. Leon was older, slower, and at last Dante took him down with a hard punch to the face. Leon hit the ground. His mouth full of blood, laughing in a wet rasp. Kill me, Cross Jr., like I killed your father. Dante raised the gun, aimed at Leon's head, his finger on the trigger. He wanted to pull it. He wanted to end 22 years of hatred right here. Then he heard Ellie call his name. Weak, in pain. He looked over and saw her on the floor, blood spreading red across her shirt. And he understood there was something more important than revenge. No, Dante said, lowering the gun. You don't get to die that easily. You'll live and you'll rot in prison until your last day. He turned his back on Leon and ran to Ellie. She lay in a pool of blood, her face pale, but she still tried to smile when she saw him. Gran, is she? Dante gathered her into his arms, tears running down his face. She's safe, and you're going to be safe too, I promise. He lifted her and ran outside where an ambulance was already waiting. Marco remained in the warehouse, eyes closed, a faint smile still on his mouth, the smile of a man who had finished his final duty. The ambulance siren tore through the night. Ellie was rushed to emergency care, Dante beside her, his hand locked around hers. Not letting go for a second, they had won. Leon had been taken alive, but the price of that victory was far too high. A month had passed since the horrifying night at the abandoned warehouse on Pier 22. Ellie lay in the intensive care unit at Cross Medical Center. The best doctors, summoned by Dante, caring for her around the clock. The bullet had torn through her left shoulder, missing a major artery by a breath. She had lost a great deal of blood, and in the first 3 days the doctors couldn't say whether she would make it. But Ellie was strong. She fought, and in the end she won. Dante didn't leave her side for that entire month. He slept in the chair beside her bed, ate whatever he could without thinking, refused every meeting and every piece of work. When Ellie opened her eyes for the first time after 3 days in a coma, the first thing she saw was him. And she almost didn't recognize him. Dante Cross, the most powerful mob boss in Chicago, sat there looking nothing like the man she knew. His beard unshaved, rough on his jaw and cheeks, his eyes bloodshot from crying and not sleeping, his clothes wrinkled. His hair a mess. For the first time she saw him as just a man, terrified because he had almost lost the woman he loved. "You look like you're homeless," Ellie said, her voice rough from days of silence. Dante looked at her, and tears spilled over. He didn't try to hide them, didn't try to act strong the way he always had. He only took her hand, lifted it, and kissed her knuckles. "You almost left me," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't ever do that again. I can't live without you." Ellie tried to smile, even though every movement sent pain through her shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Vivian and Gran came to visit every day. The 2 older women had become close during Ellie's hospital stay. Sitting side by side, holding hands, praying together for the young woman, Gran cried when she saw her granddaughter wake. She hugged Ellie, even though Ellie was hurting, and kept saying she was sorry, that it was all her fault. Ellie shook her head and said she would do it 1,000 times over if she had to, because Gran was everything to her. 2 weeks after Ellie woke up, Marco Rixai's funeral was held, a solemn service with hundreds in attendance. From Dante's people to ordinary people, Marco had helped throughout his life. Ellie was brought in a wheelchair, her shoulders still wrapped, but she insisted on being there. Marco had died because of her. She had to be there to say goodbye. Dante stood before the coffin and delivered the eulogy. His voice low and thick, but he didn't cry. He had cried enough in the long nights beside Ellie's bed. "Marco Rixai," he began, looking down at the coffin covered in white flowers, "wasn't just my right hand. He was family, the brother I never had. The only real friend I've trusted in the past 20 years. He stopped, drew a deep breath. He died protecting the person I love. He didn't hesitate, didn't think. He just moved and used his own body to shield her. That was Marco, always putting others before himself." Dante looked down at Ellie in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she sat in the wheelchair. "I don't deserve that sacrifice, but I'm going to try. I'm going to live in a way that honors his death, I promise." After the funeral, Dante brought Ellie back to the Cross Mansion to rest. They sat in the living room by the fire. Vivian and Gran, long since asleep. Dante held Ellie's hand, stared into the flames, and said something she didn't expect. "I'm going to change," he said, his voice low and serious. "I'm going to transition into legitimate business. No more violence, no more blood, no more nights like the one in that outbuilding." Ellie looked at him, startled. "You mean it?" Dante nodded. "Marco died because of me, because of the life I chose. I don't want anyone else to die. And I don't want you to spend the rest of your life afraid." He turned to her, gray eyes catching the firelight. "My mother has prayed for this for 20 years. I'm going to do it for her, for Marco, and for you." Ellie didn't speak. She only leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat there in silence. Outside, snow began to fall, laying white over the garden where she had once seen his darkness. But now she wasn't afraid. She knew he was changing. and she would stay beside him through all of it. Leon Hart was turned over to the police, along with all the evidence of Dante's father's murder 22 years earlier. He would never see freedom again, and the scar on Ellie's shoulder would stay forever, a reminder of the price of love, of sacrifice, of the night she almost lost everything, and yet in the end found everything. 6 months had passed since the horrifying night at Pier 22. Winter was gone, spring had arrived, and life had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The Cross Mansion was no longer cold and shadowed the way it used to be. Laughter filled it every day, lively conversations spilling through the living room, the smell of good food drifting from the kitchen. Gran had moved in at Vivian's invitation. At first, Gran refused. She said she was used to living simply. She didn't belong in a lavish mansion, but Vivian only smiled and said, "Then we'll live simply in a mansion." And so, the two older women became kindred spirits. They cooked together, tended the flower garden together, watched films together, told each other stories from the past. Vivian spoke of Edward, of her love for the man she had lost 22 years earlier. Gran spoke of Nora, the daughter she had lost, and the granddaughter she had raised with every ounce of love she had. They understood each other because they were both mothers who had lived through loss and pain. Ellie wasn't just a nurse anymore. She had become the director of the Cross Foundation, the charity Dante founded to help the poor, orphan children and patients who couldn't afford treatment. She loved the work because it let her keep helping people the way she always had, only on a much larger scale. Every day she went to the office, reviewed applications for aid, met with struggling families, and watched the smiles bloom on their faces when help finally reached them. The scar on her shoulder was still there. Sometimes it still ached when the weather turned cold, but she never hid it. It was a reminder of the night she almost lost everything, and also proof that she survived and was stronger than ever. Dante kept his promise. He gradually shifted the Cross Empire into legitimate business, shut down the darker operations, expanded legal companies and hospitals. He was still the most powerful man in Chicago, but now that power came from respect instead of fear. Leon Hart was rotting in prison. He would never get out, and every night when Dante came home, he was greeted by Ellie's smile, by Vivian's laughter, by Gran's laughter in the living room. For the first time in 22 years, he felt like he had a real family. One night in June, Dante took Ellie for a walk in the city. She didn't know where he was taking her, only that he seemed secretive and unusually nervous. Then the car stopped, and Ellie recognized the place. The dark alley on the south side, the place where she found Vivian 10 months earlier, the place where everything began. But the alley was different now. It had been cleaned, lit by hundreds of flickering candles, white roses scattered everywhere. And at the end of the alley, Dante dropped to one knee, a red velvet box in his hand. "This place changed my life, Ellie," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You changed me. You pulled me out of the darkness. You taught me what love is. You gave me a reason to live, to become a better man." He opened the box. Inside, a diamond ring glittered under the candlelight. "Ellie Bennett, will you stay with me for the rest of my life?" Ellie cried. She cried from happiness, from not being able to believe how much her life had changed in 10 months. She nodded, said yes 1,000 times, and Dante slid the ring onto her finger, then held her tight in the very alley that had witnessed their beginning. The wedding was held a month later, simple, intimate, just as Ellie wanted, no show, no extravagance. Only family and the people they loved most. Gran walked Ellie down the aisle instead of the father she'd never had. She cried through the entire ceremony, but they were tears of joy. Vivian sat in the front row holding Gran's hand. Two mothers watching their children find happiness, and Dante, the man who hadn't smiled in 22 years, was smiling now, radiant as he watched his bride walk toward him. That night, Ellie stood by the bedroom window, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight. Dante came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Ellie smiled. "I'm thinking about the night I found your mother in that alley. If I hadn't stopped, if I'd walked past her the way so many others would have, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have this family, this love, this life." She turned to look at him. "My grandmother used to say, never step over someone who needs help, because one day it might be you who needs someone to stop. She was right. I stopped for a stranger. And that stranger led me to a family." Dante kissed her forehead. "Kindness is never wasted," he said. "It just needs time to bloom." Ellie nodded, rested her head against his chest, "and flowers sometimes grow from the dark."